He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
These are the two opposing sides, really. Should it be Steve Perry that goes or should it be Ben Bell that goes? It seems that the feeling in the town is probably with Ben Bell at the moment.
That was RNZ's Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown on Tuesday's morning report on RNZ National, assessing the support for the two parties at loggerheads in Gore ahead of a district council meeting later that day. An extraordinary meeting for an extraordinary situation. Gore's councillors were considering a vote of no confidence in their 24-year-old mayor Ben Bell just 8 months into his first term, and also seeking to remove him from council committees. And the meeting was streamed live on the homepages of Stuff in the New Zealand Herald last Tuesday, even on the day that updates were still coming in on the fatal fire in Wellington.
Welcome back to the media, and hello and welcome if this is your first time. I just want to go through some safety measures here today because there are so many of us in this building. If it is to get unruly at the back, I will stand up and ask for silence.
But as it turned out, there was no need for any of that. The Deputy Mayor and 7 councillors who'd called for the vote didn't even move a motion of no confidence.
No, we didn't. Then we shall move on if there is no further discussion.
And what the Herald billed as a Gore showdown turned into a kind of kumbaya drum circle, according to the paper's former editor Tim Murphy, who's now the co-editor at Newsroom, who was looking on. Now, before the meeting on Tuesday, RNZ's Timothy Brown on Morning Report went on to make one thing clear: it wouldn't have made any difference even if the vote had gone against Ben Bell.
You can't force a mayor from his chair. He is democratically elected. He has to resign. He has to die or be convicted of a crime resulting in 2 years imprisonment or greater. None of those appear particularly likely at the moment.
But even though the vote would change nothing, Morning Report co-host Corin Dan wasn't wrong when he asked Timothy Brown this.
This story has really sort of blown up into the national conscious now, hasn't it?
It sure did, and at the same time the impasse was on national television as well as RNZ National. TVNZ's breakfast show host Matty McLean introduced the story this way.
Gore District Council is in tatters, with calls for Mayor Ben Bell to resign. New Zealand's youngest mayor was elected in October, but since then his term has been met with discord and controversy. Local Government Minister Kieran McAnulty told us councils are responsible for resolving their own problems, and at the moment statutory obligations are being met.
But is the Gore District Council really in tatters if its obligations are still being met, as the Minister had said? Now, this sort of thing has happened not too long ago, and not a million miles from Gore, in fact, when the Invercargill City Council revolted against Sir Tim Shadbolt clinging to the mayoral chains. But even though he was a national figure, that got nothing like the national news coverage of this case in Gore. Likewise, a similar case in Tauranga in 2020, where the council and Mayor Tenby Powell were at daggers drawn. Now, at that time, Mike Hosking on News Talk ZB accused the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern of plotting to take over dysfunctional councils.
Why on earth are you making such suggestions?
Because the department has written to both of the councils looking for information that they may involve the role of the minister in them.
And you're suddenly making an assumption that we're going to take over.
Well, that's one of the outworkings of the information they received from the letter they sent to them.
Councils.
Were you not aware of the department
detail
writing to the councils asking for information of potential ministerial involvement?
No, I think it's a ridiculous suggestion that we would take over a council.
Those councils were in fact just following the procedure for a breakdown in relationships by notifying the Department of Internal Affairs. But there was a lot of intriguing background to the tensions in Gore, and much of them were aired in Kristen Hall's report on TVNZ's Current Affairs show Sunday last weekend, introduced this way.
It's a story of gossip, controversy and dysfunction. When the country's youngest mayor squeaked into power last year, a firestorm exploded, peaking just this week.
Now, that peaking firestorm was the tip of an iceberg more than 2 decades in the making, according to what was billed as a special inquiry by newsroom.co.nz, headlined Mud and Gore. Tiano-based freelancer Vanessa Bellew had talked to more than a dozen departees from the Gore District Council over the years, and she said they spoke of a culture of fear where employees felt they weren't allowed to make mistakes or were even targeted if they were good at their jobs. She also said that the council had paid out a 6-figure sum for severance settlements down the years, many of them with non-disclosure agreements attached, and a former chief financial officer told the newsroom that his mental health had suffered after being forced out, And Chief Executive Stephen Parry had even arrived on his doorstep in London to confront him long after his departure. But last week, the Gore District Council issued a statement to Newsroom in Stephen Parry's name, insisting that all severances had been professionally handled, and that 2 surveys of the council staff had showed that 3/4 of them believed the management had created an environment of trust and fairness. Now, much of this was also covered off in TVNZ's Sunday show last weekend, which featured the long-time council CEO Stephen Parry.
Trust has been eroded significantly.
This is Steve Parry, the Gore District Council's chief executive for the past 22 years, speaking to media last month.
The last 6 months would be the toughest 6 months I've had in my local government career. It's been a bit like a Led Zeppelin song, dazed and confused.
But Mr Parry had refused, on legal advice he said, to be interviewed for that TVNZ Sunday show last weekend. And you could be forgiven for being a bit dazed by the twists in this yarn.
Mayor Ben Bell's mother is Rebecca Taylor, who used to work at the Gore District Council. Her employment ended last year with a legal dispute that cost the council more than $300,000 in legal fees alone. Rebecca now works for Councillor Joe Stringer, whose partner is Ben's former assistant, and they live next door to Ben. Rebecca works in the same office as Councillor Robert McKenzie, who ran for council as part of a team with Joe Stringer and Ben. Rebecca was the campaign manager, and she's influenced public opinion of her son since her exit from council.
Now, even before all this came to a head at this week's council vote, the tension was getting national media interest. Back in early April, for example, the Herald's daily politics podcast On the Tiles discussed the issue after Gore's new mayor appeared to be not too media-friendly himself.
The mayor abruptly cancelled an interview with the Southland Times this week. This is after he walked out of a meeting the week prior where his working relationship with the chief executive was being discussed.
And while some Gore councillors said that Bell's time in charge had been traumatic for them, the Spin-Off's Toby Manhire pointed out this week it wasn't at all obvious just what it was he was alleged to have done to spark a vote of no confidence, aside from some communication problems which Bell himself had acknowledged. While others wondered if the problem was simply, is it that Ben Bell is so young? TVNZ's breakfast show last Tuesday put that to Logan Sewell, the leader of the Young Elected Member Committee, which was created by Local Government New Zealand to support and encourage people under the age of 40 elected as councillors or mayors.
Is this pretty indicative of what it is like for young people trying to get into local body politics?
Look, I think we've seen similar cases across the country. Even myself personally have experienced it, but I think the difference there is a lot of our young elected members have had mentors to get them through this. It doesn't seem like Ben is getting that down there in Gore.
And in Wellington the same morning, the local News Talk ZB host Nick Mills told his listeners that what Ben Bell faced was 100% ageism.
I don't believe that age should be a barrier to anything in life, whether you're too young or too old. No such thing as age barriers.
But Nick Mills did go on to tell his listeners he did value experience in a local leader.
Are they disadvantaged from the start? People were talking about Tory Whānau. She needed to have time to get her feet under the table. She will make rookie mistakes. But is it time we did change the rules and made it compulsory to have sat on the council for a term before running for mayor?
Now, last year, Wellington's current mayor, Tory Whānau, displaced Andy Foster, who'd been a councillor for longer than most in the capital can remember, but he still couldn't corral councillors who didn't back him or the way he worked. News Talk ZB's daytime talkback callers are mostly not in Ben Bell's demographic, but most who called in were on his side.
He's voted in. It just is what it is. You know what I mean?
All these old bastards down there, want to do things the same old way. You've got the young broom coming along, and they're as reluctant for change. Well, if 110% support what he's doing.
And last month, the Herald's On the Tiles podcast on this also sought the opinions of Nick Leggett, who was the youngest mayor in the country back in 2010, and another one-term mayor of Wellington, Justin Lester, who said this.
Look, and I just want to pay tribute to Gore. It's a wonderful little community. I spent some time down there over the summer this year, actually. Famous for their oats, for their rolling R's and their golden guitars.
Stereotypes travel far, it seems. Anyhow, after the district councillors in Gore backed away from that motion of no confidence last Tuesday and the demand for Ben Bell's resignation, Ben Bell told the meeting this.
I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor McKenzie that we have real potential here to come together, to reunite and to find a way forward, and what a redemption story it will be.
It remains to be seen just how much interest the national media really has in Gore District Council getting it together, or not. But in RNZ's morning report last Thursday, Ben Bell's counterpart in New Plymouth, Mayor Neil Holdham, blamed the media for creating his problem.
We had the Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown come in and he was framed as a sort of a strong leader and a new broom and big changes for Auckland. Yet the narrative for Ben Bell as a 23-year-old New Zealand's youngest mayor.
But was it the national media attention which actually caused the remarkable reversal in that meeting? Logan Savoury has covered the Gore drama and produces the daily news service for subscribers, the Southland Tribune, which he kicked off this year after a long spell reporting for the Southland Times.
I absolutely think that's the case. I don't know how you can go from publicly stating you lack trust in the mayor and you were concerned he wasn't acting in the best interest of both the community and the council, to a matter of a few days later the council sending out a press release saying the council's united, they're getting on with it. So public pressure, which come from extreme media intention, had to play a role in what was a pretty incredible flip-flop.
Yeah, so in the Tribune this week, your publication, you asked the question, how did Gore end up in a primetime current affairs spot? As we've heard, there were similar situations, similar breakdowns between mayors and councillors in Tauranga and in Invercargill in your patch in recent years that didn't get quite this level of media attention outside, their own local areas. What was it about this that got the media so excited?
I think it's absolutely the fact that Gore has New Zealand's youngest mayor, and it comes at a time when obviously there's been a bit of a spotlight on local government and whether it truly reflects the community in terms of age group, and the majority of councillors are probably 60, 65 plus, or certainly in that older age group bracket anyway, and you had a 24-year-old, a now 24-year-old as mayor, and at the same time a long-standing CEO who's been in the role for 20 years. And I think that attracted a lot of intrigue and quite significant media attention. As you mentioned, there was a bit of interest around the Invercargill situation given Sir Tim Shabolt's profile, but I think you're right, particularly in the Tauranga situation, if you compare it to Gore, I don't think the media attention has been the same.
And maybe some of those elements, almost, I don't mean to trivialise it, but in terms of media trying to explain a story that people didn't know the characters at all around the rest of the country, the fact that Ben Bell's mother had a history with the council and a falling out that resulted in a six-figure payout and all of that, those sort of elements also played into it for the national media, just treating it as a bit of a yarn?
Absolutely, yeah, there's lots of strands to it. I can understand the wider interest in it.
But looking at this another way, Logan, if there had been, as some people allege, a culture of bullying and exclusion or that might have contributed to people leaving the council, leaving jobs, or some people saying they've been effectively forced out of them, and if this was going on over a period of a couple of decades, was this sort of media attention overdue? Were there things going on that maybe local media weren't bringing to attention of people that should have been concerned, and in the end it's a good thing that national media have got involved?
Well, I think quite possibly. That doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't another side to it. Obviously, you could talk to senior staff at the Gore Council who are very complimentary of Steve Parry's leadership. I think the Gore Council situation is pretty well covered by local media, Southland Times, obviously us at the moment, and others. But you've got to remember it's a district of about 13,000 or maybe 15,000. So it naturally gets shuffled down the order a wee bit in priorities just because of the size of it. So I think what it does highlight, though, is the need to continue to cover these smaller councils because as soon as we do end up in the situation, I don't think we are at Gore at the moment, but if it's not been covered at all, I think then there is potential for real issues. Maybe in reflection, local media, all of us involved, could have delved a wee bit deeper earlier on.
Well, you mentioned there's Stephen Parry, the council chief executive, a real important person in the story, has supporters, but he didn't take part in, say, particularly that TVNZ Sunday show, or hasn't responded to other media requests. You know, he's cited legal advice on that. But the fact that his side of the story in his own voice wasn't part of it, is there a fairness issue there? Did it effectively skew it in favour of those who backed Ben Bell?
Personally, I think it did. And I know, obviously, Steve Parry's probably in a difficult situation where he was asked to talk about his employer. Probably wasn't going to get much out of it by speaking in terms of his relationship with Ben Bell. However, what ended up happening is we got this picture painted of young Mayor, the way he's being treated by Steve Parry and other councillors. And I'm not saying that that's not necessarily correct, but I also would love to have heard the other side of the story, because we had been told by councillors that they lacked trust in him, some of his actions over recent weeks. But we never actually got to hear what are those reasons, what are those actions that they're talking about. Someone needed to tell us why they made the stand to ask him to resign.
I guess in terms of fairness, you know, they were given opportunities to talk and declined them for whatever reason.
Absolutely, yeah. And maybe in hindsight, I think they probably should have spoken about it.
It was interesting listening to Morning Report. The new Plymouth Mayor, Neil Holdham, appeared on the programme in the middle of the week and said, look, there's an issue here. And he credited one journalist, Stuff's Andrea Vance, who wrote about this for The Post last week. I think this is a piece behind their new paywall, so maybe a lot of other people haven't seen it. But this didn't actually mention the Gore Council, but about the wider issue of appointed chief executives and the sort of corporatised system we have now in local government, which actually gives quite a bit of power and clout to people that aren't actually elected. Real clout. Do you think he's right about that, and local government reporting needs to sort of broaden out and actually look at that as well as the elected reps?
Some of the councillors that operate well, or probably don't hit the headlines as others do, probably have strong governance in place. They are in charge and the CEO follows the instructions. Where some of the troubles seem to have come is where the CEOs believe that they need to fill a void of such, and then they become the story, becoming more involved in what you would argue is governance issues. And I guess in a reporting sense, look at the CEOs is probably a worthy thing to do.
Finally, it was interesting that when it was all over in that meeting and it looks like there'd been a resolution, and Ben Bell spoke of the possibility of a redemption story. But do you think there will now be national media interest in what happens next in the redemption story? Or is the conflict a better story for national media, and the fact of it all being resolved and coming together in what Ben Bell called the Gore way won't be one we'll hear so much about in the national media?
I would imagine there's still going to be plenty of interest in this. If they can turn this around from, as I mentioned, in a space of a few days, going from the fact that they didn't have trust in the mayor, if they were able to flip this around and all of a sudden 7 months into a 3-year term for the rest of the term, there's no problems, I would be very surprised. So I expect there'll be more media attention on the Gore District Council in months to come. And particularly, we've still got a situation where the CEO and the mayor are not speaking. So I just can't see how this is going to stay out of the headlines, to be fair.
That was Logan Savoury, the publisher of the Southland Tribune, an online service of Southland news for subscribers, which he founded this year after a long career covering Southland news and local politics for the region's daily paper, the Southland Times.